Welcome to Lesson 10 of our series, More Than Grasshoppers. Today we're going to be talking about grasshoppers under a magnifying glass. What did those spies in Numbers 13 see when they looked in the mirror? Really, the more telling question should be what they thought others saw when they looked at them. The answer, of course, is grasshoppers. They assumed their identity and they assumed their enemy thought they looked like grasshoppers. Why did those men worry so much about the enemy's opinion? Now, before we think ourselves somewhat superior to those spies, let's be real. This age old problem of worrying about what others think of us still preys on our minds. It's why the advertising industry exists, to convince us of what we need based on how it will make us feel in comparison to others. We can fold our hands and scorn those poor, insecure souls who let the rest of the world dictate the way they dress and the toys they buy. Yet, isn't it just as sad and taxing when rather than being influenced by others, we try to influence others to think of us in a certain way? Have you ever wondered what people thought about you? I know I have. When I'm meeting someone at church or maybe going to a funeral, I usually wear at least a sport coat. I think, how will I be perceived with what I'm wearing? When I'm showing a house in the real estate world and I have never met a client, I usually dress in a way that I think will impress them. In other words, I dress so others will have a good opinion of me, or at least in my mind, it's that way. Sometimes we do things that maybe we're not even comfortable with, but we do it to impress. Is it true that many of the world fashion their lives after Hollywood? But in reality, those who are setting the trends and the fashion are really not happy people. But let me make this clear. Only God gets to define your worth. Somehow, you must reach the point of living for an audience of one. It means shutting off the voices of a society that says you're to this or you're to that, just fill in the blank, and not comparing ourselves with one another. It's no wonder that on the heels of talking about the battle between the flesh and the spirit and the understanding that we are God's, Paul urged the church, listen to this verse, for we dare not class ourselves or compare ourselves with those who commend themselves, but they, measuring themselves by themselves and comparing themselves and among themselves, they are not wise. Comparing yourself to others and attempting to measure up to society's standards will do nothing but leave you feeling incomplete. You are not valued and defined by what others assume. You are designed and defined by God. Every age level of the church must grasp this vital biblical principle. Our life is authored by God, and He doesn't mean for the fate of your story to be the subject of the critics who, who say you are this or you are that. You should be subject unto God, and your life should reflect the peace and the security of the revelation that you belong to God. It's impossible to talk about being secure in our God given identity and its implications without acknowledging the pressures that have been added to us, especially since the advent of social media. It probably reveals a little something about my age, but I'm really glad that I didn't grow up with social media because mistakes I made in the past are limited to old friends, maybe from junior high or high school, who I imagine have probably mercifully closed out the past as the past. Today's people, Today people broadcast impulsive thoughts and pictures without the advantage of reflection. And that instant transmission forges everybody's mistakes on the minds of a wide, fickle audience. It's image management on a whole new level, and it's scary. Technology can be good and it can be bad. We must use it for the good and be careful with the bad. Have you ever started to post something on social media, or maybe you actually, God forbid, did, and it was out of frustration, and then it's out there. Some of us, we realize, oh, we better pull that down. But somebody has already seen that post. Somebody took a screenshot of it and shared it with someone else. We must be careful not to put our frustrations out, especially as God-given people who are there to project an image that God would want us to project. One reason social media becomes a substitute for face-to-face relationships is that it fosters a false sense of intimacy in a virtual world. The lack of face-to-face communication erodes inhibitions, enabling people to communicate things more extremely and sooner than they would in person. It also explains why a 14-year-old or a 40-year-old can abandon their family to be with their soulmate that they met online just 5 weeks before. Relationships of any kind suffer from a lack of inhibitions. And given this phenomenon of online disinhibitions, our virtual relationship building is plagued by significant threats. Another negative impact of social media is it creates unrealistic expectations of what life should be and pressure to create artificial broadcasts to project an appealing life that wins followers, a problematic form of image management. When you see someone on social media, you don't really know what they're like. You don't know their attitudes. You don't know their history. You don't know anything other than just what they put out in a picture. And in addition to this confused sense of reality, social media distorts our engagement with community. I think of the irony represented by a picture I saw on Facebook recently of family members sitting in their living room on a holiday, but they're all looking at the phone. These scenarios are typical of the way we spend our time together. To ask a student-aged individual to turn off their phone to sit through a class or a meeting is as foreign to them as if you asked them to cut off 3 fingers. Some studies suggest young people who have grown up with mobile devices experience physical symptoms of separation anxiety when they're separated from their phones. If we are committed to embracing our royal identity, we should be seeking to mirror God to others. And to do that, we've got to connect on a personal level. God was present among his people, so much so that he became flesh and came to earth to minister to us. He is still an ever-present God today. There is a growing inability in our world today for people to be present. How often do we even look up from our screens to look at what those are saying to us? When was the last time you put your phone away or even put it down to carry on a conversation? In our image and for our image to reflect God's image, we've got to give ourselves to others and be present when we're with them. A couple of generations ago, a song they sang in church had a line that said that God was never busy. He's always on the line. And that was a song called Telephone to Glory. A contemporary version of that song could just as easily celebrate that God never multitasks when you want to talk. He gives all of himself to be present with us. There's gray areas for interpretation, but if we want to mirror him in who we are and what, then we are called to a ministry of presence that focuses on values and celebrates fellow human beings by fully being with them. Some of you are probably on your phones right now while I'm talking. Quickly, look around and see who just got caught. Social media detracts from community by conveying a false sense of connectedness that is weak upon closer scrutiny. We meet fewer people, we gather less, and when we gather, our bonds are less meaningful and less easy. My mother-in-law, who is 82 years old and very much a user of Facebook, proudly proclaimed to me a few weeks ago she has over 2,000 best friends on Facebook. I asked sarcastically, but how many of those are sure friends? In other words, how many would show up at your funeral? Needless to say, I got the look. Because we think we have such a broad network of friends, we make less effort to engage in community in actuality. Additionally, with the convenience social media offers of managing our friends on our teams, people are retreating from actual relationships for virtual relationships. But let's be clear. I'm not a fan of tossing your cell phone or your computer in the backyard or living in a cave with no electricity. I concede that social media has its benefits. It's 250 miles from my driveway to where my sister lives. It's over 2,000 miles to where my brother lives. My wife's parents live 350 miles away. I'm so thankful for convenient social media tools that enable me to see a picture of what is happening during their day. But I also recognize that technology is no substitute for my getting together and sharing life with them. Scripture compares the church to a bride, a body, and a temple. And in each metaphor, there is a communal aspect. Just as we are all baptized into one body, there is a relational factor to being God's people. We speak of the family of God, and if you've ever experienced loss or trouble and been comforted and helped by the church, you understand the familia language. But our relationships don't begin and end with our fellow church members. We are sent into a world that needs the hope that we have. And reaching them means touching the lives of people beyond our normal social circle at church. Will social media distort the family nature of the church? Will social media help or hurt us in our efforts to build relationships with others outside our church? Only time will tell. What an advantage, because you can use both of those things. I'm not speaking evil against social media. I'm not speaking good of social media. I'm saying use both to the good. As Christians, when we are on social media or in person, we should first of all always let our apostolic identity be clear. If there is a contradiction between who we project to our audience and who our closest friends know us to be, we should stop and have an honest self-evaluation. Secondly, we must ask God to deliver us from any pressure we feel consciously or subconsciously to live a life that wins the approval of our social media followers. There are reasons churches of yesterday had fellowship meetings, multi-night revivals, and dinner on the ground. If our church culture no longer can fit these events into our schedules, we would be well served to look for new means of bringing the body together for community. Environmental conservatives have learned the best way to combat erosion is to add or plant materials that give the eroding soil something to which it can cling. Whether that's a hay bale stacked on the side of a hill or using Christmas trees stacked along beaches to obstruct sand from being swept away. We can't stop the progress of technology and its eroding toil, but we can stake down some face-to-face measures of relationship building around which we can nurture community. Remember, we are under a magnifying glass, but that is not a bad thing. Because if we will have community and have relationships and display to the world that Christ is in us, then when a magnifying glass gets on us and is placed on us, it only promotes Christ, not only in our own eyes, but in everyone else that sees us through the magnifying glass. God bless you.